Wana yetu tumeongeza 9 minutes, so utatusimamisha at 12:39. Mabibi na mabwana, hamjambo. Hata mimi nitajaribu pale nitaweza, ikishindikana Kizungu na Kiswahili tutachanganya. Lakini I'm glad to be the moderator for this session. Na hii session yetu itakuwa mara tatu, or in 3 equal parts. The first, tutakuwa na online engagement na CEO wa the Institute of Economic Affairs, Bwana Kwame Owino. He will be joining us online shortly. And then baada ya presentation yake tutakuwa na maswali kwa panelists wetu watatu hapa. Alafu tutafungua to the floor to ask any questions. Because niko na 1 hour and I can talk for that hour peke yangu. Wacha nikaribishe Bwana Kwame atupe presentation yake, and then we will go directly into the questions. Asanteni sana. The high table over there, please.
I'm here. All right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kwame Owino from the Institute of Economic Affairs, and I'm glad to have this opportunity to speak to you. I apologize I could not be in the meeting because I have another meeting at the Institute of Economic Affairs just right after this, and I don't think I'd have been able to make that time. But anyway, thank you for this invite. Now, I've been asked to speak about 3 things. One of this is to refocusing Kenya's extractive sector as a vehicle for domestic revenue mobilization and debt reduction. And then the final part is basically, does Kenya's government perceive it as such? So it's a question about, does the government of Kenya realize the potential of the industry? And is there scope for this industry to become a driver of revenue and then debt reduction as well? So the way to do this is to start with some data. I don't have a presentation, but I'll just refer us all to every year the National Bureau of Statistics publishes the economic survey. And the economic survey, there's a specific chapter, I think it's chapter 8, which talks about natural resources and the extractive sector. Okay, you're asking me to speak a little louder. So that is the sector. Chapter 8 of the economic survey published by the National Bureau of Statistics covers the extractive sector and natural resources. Now, the latest edition, which covers the quantity of mineral production from 2017 to 2021, is the one I'll be referring to. And in it, there's a table 8.9. That table provides us with what is the quantity of mineral production, measured mineral production in Kenya, and it's a good thing because basically, if we come from the data, we'll be able to answer the first question, which is basically, can the extractive sector become a vehicle for for resource mobilization? And the only way to answer that is to ask how much mineral production takes place first and what's their value. So that helps us to answer that. And then we go down to the second question about whether it's useful to consider mineral resources and the royalties that come from minerals as effective ways of reducing the national debt. So this data has measured quantities of minerals produced, and I'd like us first to actually talk about what kind of minerals Kenya produces. And it's telling us that here, among the minerals that Kenya produces come all the way from soda ash. Of course, that's Magadi, the Magadi area just a few kilometers from Nairobi. Fluorspar, but fluorspar production ended in 2017. I've tried to find out why, but some of the data suggests that the company did not do well. Others suggest that the resources were exhausted. I'm not too sure which is which, but the data, the literature that I've encountered suggests that the resources may have been depleted, and the mines were not extended, in the sense that there was no new investment. And so that also suggests something that we can all carry out as people, and we carry forward, trying to invite investments, because this is a sector that is very capital intensive. So there's fluorspar, there's salt, then there's crushed and refined soda, there's carbon dioxide in good quantities. Of course, there's also gold. There are gemstones in Kenya, and then of course the big one that all of us have been speaking about is titanium. You will notice that this list does not include
it looks like we have lost Bwana Kwame Owino, but right before we lost him, he was speaking on the economic survey report and the value of the minerals that have been produced within the country. As we try to sort out the issues, ningependa nianze kuuliza maswali our panelists, na as fast as we can, so that we will give Bwana Kwame Owino time baadaye. Na swali langu la kwanza ningependa niulize Dr. Ongore, but kabla sijamuuliza, ningependa pia ujitambulishe, at least watu wetu ambao wako hapa kwa hii conference ya is it Jukwaa La Madini ama ni Haki Madini? Wacha nisikie watu wakiongea. Inaitwa aje?
Recording in progress.
Jukwaa La Madini. Tafadhali, please introduce yourself, and then
but when it comes to the other big,
please we'll request Kwame to we will engage him shortly. So daktari or professor, karibu sana. The microphone is there.
Asante sana. Kwa jina naitwa Vincent Ongore. Sasa hivi mimi ni mwalimu katika chuo kikuu cha what do you call technical? Chuo kikuu cha ufundi, Technical University of Kenya. Chuo kikuu cha ufundi wa Kenya. Is that true? Na niko katika kiwango cha profesa. Profesa ni nini kwa Kiswahili? Ni profesa tu. Na niko na furaha tele kwa kujiunga nanyi siku ya leo, na niko tayari kabisa kujaribu. Wajua wakati wetu Kiswahili hatukufunzwa, haikuwa taaluma ya kilazima, lakini nimejaribu. Kwa hivyo lakini hapo awali nilifanya kazi kwa miaka 30 katika idara ya ushuru na nikahitimu. Sasa ndio nikaamua niwe mwalimu sasa hivi, nifunze mambo ya kibiashara na mambo za uchumi na zinginevyo. Is that correct? Thank you very much. Nimejaribu.
Asante sana daktari, na ningependa kuanza na swali la kwanza. Daktari hajatuambia amewahi kuserve kama senior manager ama deputy commissioner KRA. Na swali langu la kwanza ni it's related to domestic resource mobilization. Tuliambiwa domestic resource mobilization ni nini? Tunafanyia nini? Tunaongeza. Tusisahau hiyo ya kuongeza. So daktari, professor, there has been a push by the government currently with the aggressive taxation measures to mobilize domestic resources. This is an alternative, or the government is viewing mobilizing domestic resources as an alternative to the debt-driven strategy that was adopted over the last decade. Kulingana na taaluma yako and your experience, what is the role of the extractive sector currently in addressing domestic resource mobilization? Or do we even view it as a sector that can contribute towards enhanced domestic resource mobilization?
Naomba radhi tafadhali mtaniruhusu niongee Kiingereza kidogo kwa sababu some of the things I want to address I have not considered them in Kiswahili, so allow me to just speak some English and then wataalamu wa lugha watatafsiri. All right? Now, as early as 1989, Dr. Robert John Ouko, then foreign minister, was addressing a press conference in Oslo. And someone asked him, a journalist, Dr. Ouko, do we have sufficient natural resource endowment in Kenya? And of course, he was a diplomat. Those who are here remember him. He said, God could not have been that bad to have placed a little minerals in Sudan to the north and a little in Tanzania to the south and omit Kenya. Now what Dr. Ouko was saying was that Kenya is natural resource endowed. Right? So we begin from the premise that Kenya is natural resource endowed and that we should be able to exploit our natural resource endowment to enable us mobilize our domestic resources. Because as we all understand, domestic resource mobilization is a way of engendering our sovereignty and our national pride. If we are able to underwrite all our recurrent and development expenditure using our domestic resources, we become a proud country and our sovereignty is deepened. But that then brings the question, what is government doing? But I will restrict my presentation to the tax perspective because that is what I've been told to do. Now, quite a bit of work has gone into this sector in terms of policy thinking about how well to manage the taxation regime in the extractive sector. And of course, we know the issue of revenue sharing formula. We know the issue of taxation of players in this sector, and of course we know about the incentives that government has put in place to streamline or to attract more players into this sector. Unfortunately, since tallow activities slowed down, not much in terms of policy direction with respect to taxes has taken place. And so we have seen a situation where government itself has slowed down in terms of investment in the sector, because looking around, the sector is dominated by multinational enterprises. And of course, we all know that these multinational enterprises have their own interests. They don't come here to serve your interests. They are business enterprises. And if you look at that sector critically, you realize that government is yet to concretize or wrap its ideas around what is important for us. For example, you know that there are people who are in that sector as artisans. There is no legislation that protects artisans in that sector. In fact, they are treated as people who are engaged in illegalities. And so we have situations of illicit cross-border trade where someone mines whatever, and I heard there are people from Migori, so they understand this. They do the mining of gold in Makalda and those places and then quickly move across into Tanzania because of lack of a legislative framework to onboard artisanal miners or players in this industry. Now the first thing that then we are saying government should but has not done is to create an enabling legislation for all players to feel comfortable and to do or to make their contribution to the sector. The other thing that is an indication that government is yet to do some work in this area is the fact that there are pieces of legislations that are domiciled in different ministries. For example, the question of royalties is domiciled in Ministry of Mining, but the taxation bit is in KRA, which is Ministry of Finance. And so until we concretize and align, the various legislations touching on mining and related activities, we are still going to have disjointed effort. The other thing which I think government should do, which it has not done very well, which indicates that they are not up to scratch with respect to this sector, is the fact that we are still lacking a thinking around green taxation. There is actually a link between what players in the extractive sector do and how that affects the environment and the taxation bit. So if we have an all-encompassing legislative framework that discusses not just the extractive sector but also issues of ecological footprints, issues of environmental footprints, and generally issues of carbon credits around this place, so that we design a fiscal framework that takes into consideration the credit taxation, how players benefit and how they transfer these credits and how they sell them, and linking it to extractive sector. That, in my opinion, would be a very good thing. But then the other side, recently we saw that government asked us in the press to give ideas around transfer pricing activities, and which is an indication that not much has been done in that sector, and yet there's so much touching on transfer pricing that needs to be brought on board. And as we progress, I'm going to delve into details about some of these things. And so in a nutshell, extractive sector has tremendous potential for domestic revenue mobilization. But that potential will not fall to us from heaven like manna. We have to invest in it. We have to have very clear thinking around it. We have to develop legislative framework around it, and we have to mobilize the people to protect it through a robust revenue sharing framework, and protecting the communities that live within areas where the extractives take place. And thank you very much.
Asante sana daktari.
Mtu atasema kwa Kiswahili.
Well, that's just how I've been thrown under the bus, but nitajaribu kusummarize. Sekta yetu ya madini iko na potential. Potential in Kiswahili iko na uwezo. Thank you so much. You see, now we have a lot of translators in the room. Inamaanisha tuko na uwezo, lakini sekta hii iko dominated. Mtu ani translate dominated na hizi kampuni kubwa kubwa, na imepuuza the small artisanal miners ambao pia wao wako na potential. Na tukitaka kuendelea kama nchi, inamaanisha lazima tuweke rasilimali kuendeleza pia hii sekta ya small artisanal miners, ndio iweze kuzuia pia what was called cross-border illegal trade. kama the small artisanal miners wanaonekana ni kama they are doing illegal activities, what does that mean to the growth of the sector? So kifupi, profesa ametuambia tuko na uwezo, lakini uwezo haitaanguka kutoka mbinguni. Lazima tujipange kama nchi, tutengeneze sheria ama tutunge sheria ile itatuwezesha kubenefit from the potential of the mining sector. My next question will go to Ms. Miriam. Nitaomba pia yeye ajiintroduce before ajibu swali langu, lakini naweza kuuliza swali, then as you introduce yourself you can answer. The question is, as we are looking at the potential of this sector towards domestic resource mobilization, do the revenues that are generated from the mining sector or from the extractive sector support the government's debt reduction strategy? Swali langu ni kuuliza tu, mapato ile serikali imepata kutokana na the extractive sector, je, ukilinganisha na pesa zile ama fedha zile tunatumia kulipa madeni, je, tunaweza sema mapato ya kutoka kwa mining sector inaweza kusaidia kikubwa kulipa madeni tuko nazo kama nchi ya Kenya? Asante.
Asante Mohamed. Sidhani kama my Kiswahili will be good as yours, but we'll try. So kwa majina ni Miriam Wanjiku, nafanya kazi na shirika la Institute of Public Finance. Na part of the work that I do, I work with artisanal miners in various counties, and I am happy to see a few faces of people that we have interacted with. And to your question, I think it's a very trick question, if I could say that. And also following from what Professor has said, if I can just maybe point out and emphasize, amesema kwamba tuko na uwezo, lakini serikali haijatia zile jitihada ensure that we are collecting as much as we should from the sector. So tukiangalia pia swala la public debt, I think in the recent past kumekuwa na a lot of conversation. Debt kwa Kiswahili nini? Debt. Deni la umma. Yes, public debt. Deni letu la umma limekuwa likiongezeka. I think since devolution tumeona hiyo growth, kwa sababu tunaongea from 2 trillion in 2013-14 to around 9.6 trillion or thereabout. Na pia tunakumbuka the Office of the Auditor General wakisema they cannot state the exact nature or the exact amount that we owe in public debt. So kadri vile deni letu la umma linaendelea kugrow, pia the repayments ama yale malipo ambayo tunalipa kama interest that one, interest, riba na redemptions kwa hizo public debts pia imekuwa ikigrow. For instance, in the current financial year we are repaying to a tune of 1.6 trillion. So that's one side of the story. How much then are we receiving from the extractives? And I would like to limit myself on the issues of the royalties, because hapo ndio tumekuwa tukiona a lot of information on how much the government has been receiving, and even that ukiangalia from different sources you will get different amounts. So from the Office of the Auditor General report of 2021-2022 alisema by the end of that financial year tulikuwa tumepata 10.2 billion as royalties. So ukitoa ile 20% inaenda kwa counties na ile 10% inaenda kwa communities, the national government inabaki na around 7.2 billion. So swali ni 7.2 billion yet tunalipa, and that is a collection of 6 years since the approval of the Mining Act. So tunaongea from 2016-17 to 2021-22 we have collected 10.2 billion. Then now how much are we repaying as debt? I don't know. I think I would leave that to us to say, are we realistically saying that how much we are receiving from the extractive is enough to repay our debt? I think your guess is as good as mine, ya kwamba yale mapato tunapata kwa hii industry hayatoshi kulipa even part of the debt. That is one conclusion that you can draw. But also borrowing from what the professor has said is we need to focus now on the potential that this sector has. The government has proclaimed itself and saying that the extractive industry, that is oil, gas and minerals, its contribution to the GDP by 2030 should at least be 10%. That's one. But currently it's contributing at least 1% or less than 1%. So what are the challenges? And I think Professor has stated we are not investing as much as we should to the sector. So what do we need to do is that, the country, we keep on saying we have a lot of minerals. And I saw the CS the other day saying that we have at least 970 mineral occurrences in, I think, 16 counties. But are we able to say that this is how much we can earn? Of all the minerals that we have, are we able to say that this is how much we can receive from the sector? And I'm not in any way saying that whatever we receive from the extractives should go into the repaying of debt, no. But if we can collect as much as we can kutoka kwa hii sector, then tutakuwa na, we will increase what the government says the fiscal space. Ile ndio professor amesema ku make sure that our expenses are being funded by our own resources. We shall also ensure that we have an increase on resources that we can use also for debt reduction. So at the end of the day, I would say no, the resources that we are receiving currently are not sufficient to paying our debt, but there is potential, and as the government has said, there is potential. So we need to tap into that potential so that we increase the resources that are available to us for the various activities that the government does, including repayment of debt. Thank you.
Asante sana Miriam. Miriam ametuambia, now that I'm the translator, deni kutoka 2013, deni yetu iliongezeka kutoka 1.8 trillion, saa hii kufikia mwezi uliopita ilikuwa 10.5 trillion. Na malipo ile tunalipa last year peke yake, interest tulilipa more than 635 billion on interest. Na development expenditure last financial year was around 475 billion. I can't point out the exact figure. Na tumesikia mapato ya royalty tumepata ngapi? 10 billion. Tukitoa the 20% to go to the counties na 10% ile inaenda kwa communities, which still, are we transferring the 10% to the communities? Sometime back kulikuwa na challenges. I don't know kama hizo challenges zimekuwa addressed. 11 counties wamepata. Tulikuwa na the law that was approved, I think, on how to share that had opened that up, because the Auditor General alikuwa anauliza maswali ni kwa nini bado communities hawaja benefit. So pointing on what Marianne has said, it is that yes, the potential is there, na tukiweza pia, if the mining and extractive sector inaweza kucontribute to 10% of GDP, inamaanisha pia the mapato ama domestic resource mobilization, the capacity yetu itaongezeka. And one of the questions that maybe I hope Kwame will answer in his presentation is, mapato ya kutoka kwa domestic resource mobilization, what is the best use for it? Mostly environmental activists are saying that tutumie for environmental restoration. To the next question, I'll welcome my colleague Edwin pia atajiintroduce na before ajibu swali letu la leo. But we have heard that the extractive industries within the country is mainly dominated by multinational corporations or multinational enterprises. I know you are an expert in IFFs. you'll say that in illegal financial flows. He'll introduce himself. But how can we use the International Tax Corporation towards addressing or supporting domestic DRM mobilization efforts, especially on issues of addressing tax avoidance? Kwa sababu tulisikia profesa alituambia the multinational corporations wana serve interest ya nani? Interest ya nani? So tafadhali bwana Edwin, please introduce yourself and you can one or two things about that.
Okay. Asante sana bwana Salat. Amjambo. Kwa majina naitwa Edwin Birech. Mimi ni mratibu msaidizi wa muungano wa bunge inayo linganiana zaidi na utoroshaji wa fedha haramu na ushuru, illicit financial flows and taxation. Domestic resource mobilization ni donda sugu sana katika ile kuharness domestic resource. Inaitwa uhamasishaji wa rasilimali za ndani, domestic resource mobilization. And one of the key issue has been associated to illegal and illicit financial flows in such a way that the extractive sector, asa sector ya uziduaji, is one of the heavily affected sectors katika illicit financial flows. Na jambo linalo zingatiwa zaidi, it's the issue about how can we harness domestic resource mobilization by curbing illicit financial flows. So in the extractive sector, it has been undermined by things to do with tax avoidance, kukwepa kulipa kodi, na lile ambalo limekuwa pointed aswa sana ni multinational corporations, in such a way that multinational corporations come with tax incentives and say we are going to bring in more revenue. At the same time, we are going to employ more people. At the same time, we are going to do corporate social responsibilities. So that is actually one of the key pillars that has really affected the extractive sector. And at this moment, kuna haja zaidi ya kulitizama ili dodo, manake itakuwa vigumu sana for a country to say that we are going to bring in more taxes, we are going to harvest in more taxes, but in the real sense, the tax avoidance that is being hampered and created by the multinational corporations is one of the big thing. The current situation, I'll speak for Kenya, because I understand deeply what is going through right now. Kenyans are being taxed heavily at the moment, in the sense that, if we were not losing money generated from the kind of resources that we are having as a nation, then we would be able to sustain ourselves in such a way that we will not even be going to look for loan from the English side of it, from the west side of it, to sustain our infrastructure. So mfumo wa sasa, the current international financial architecture, especially the global level, is really saddening to such a way that imethofika sana. It's becoming a challenging environment to even just do business ideally, especially in the extractive sector. And I'll give you statistics. According to an IMF report, but I don't like using IMF as a based to the reasons, because they've actually put us in the scenario that we are in at this moment, and I'll say it without an iota of even apology. So they said that we are losing $730 million to illicit financial, to corporate tax avoidance, But then the UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, they said at least $40 billion is lost per year. You see, the difference is IMF is giving million, and then UNCTAD is actually giving the figures in billions. So we are losing so much, in terms of that. So you can imagine how much that money would be able to do infrastructures in the country, to build the kind of roads that we are having right now, and to build even the sectors that the health sectors that we are currently financing. So it is one of the biggest challenges in terms of how can we work on this. Of course, the African continent needs to build a robust structure in such a way that we devise mechanisms whereby loopholes resulting from illicit financial flows has been blocked. So this is actually one of the key things that we are going. I mean, ideally, government should even like put more energies on. Kuna ile swala la tax harmonization. It is one of the critical areas ambayo pia there's need to be relooked onto, because it's becoming a reality that ili swala la tax harmonization, if it's not done today, then it must have been done as of yesterday. Then kuna ile ambayo tunaita extractive contracts na zile multinational corporations. So swala kuu ni as citizens, do we even know how many multinational corporations are operating in Kenya, or even generally across board? Do we? We don't, because we don't have, registers, public accessible registers on how many multinational corporations are operating in Kenya. So this is the interesting thing. Who awards these mining contracts to these multinational corporations? Is it the government? Yes. Is it the executive? Definitely yes. Now, for the many members of parliament across board that I've worked with across Africa, they say they don't even know how many multinational corporations are in their respective countries. Kazi ya wabunge ni nini? Oversight, legislation, representation. Si ni kweli? So even in their oversight role, they are saying they are not even aware how many MNCs have been given contracts and how many revenue have been generated from these contracts. Number two, it is actually the treasury that gives incentives, to these multinational corporations. And it is the discretion of the minister in charge of treasury to award these incentives to these multinational corporations. So even the role of MPs is actually overshadowed, and I think that is where we need to begin with as sectors in the extractive, as players in the extractive sectors, if we indeed seek to harness the domestic resource mobilization that we desire to achieve.
Before we peane the microphone, maybe to the second question, are there any examples? Because this morning we were told that last month the cabinet had partially lifted the moratorium on mining, and with this is to spur growth in the sector. So are there any examples within the continent that Kenya can look into as a good example to mobilizing DRM?
I wouldn't say they are examples, but I think I will actually tie this to the African mining vision. Looking at Africa, I think Tanzania is actually headed somewhere in implementation of the Africa mining vision, what we call the Thabo report that emanated from that. So in terms of looking at that, and I think the key players in Tanzania, especially Uziduaji, I think the call is Uziduaji in Tanzania, have actually done that. But then again, if you look at the African as a continent, we're still grappling with challenges, especially on emerging mining extractives economy. So this is a new thing. It's only that people who got wind that extractive was beneficial took advantage of the unavailability of knowledge, especially with the community, and by them they were taking advantage of the community just to enrich themselves. So in terms of that, mine would be a little bit twisted, not just giving examples based on that, but are there countries that have designed robust progressive tax policies for the extractive sector? I've given Tanzania, and I would always use Tanzania as one of the best examples based on what they've done with the AMV. It all starts, with getting the facts right in terms of what amount is lost and what amount is avoided by multinational corporations in terms of harnessing domestic resource mobilization for a country. So basically, that would be one. The number two would be urging the government ideally to overly, giving out tax incentives. But then again, as citizens, have we engaged our members of parliament and say, we elected you to do oversight, but then again, we are feeling that you are failing us in this sector.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I cross over to Professor, my next question is to Marianne. And in this conference, we see the small scale of the artisanal miners represented in this conference. And they have a very big role to play towards DRM, domestic resource mobilization. So, in your opinion, how can the government support the ASM sector or the small scale, the artisanal miners, to ensure that they can contribute, or like we improve the quality of their working conditions to ensure that they contribute towards DRM? What the government can do. Okay. What is the present situation? If you can briefly, we have like 10-12 minutes before we cross over to Kwame. So just briefly, generally, on what can be done to support them. Situational analysis and what can be done to support them. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll pick it up from where Edwin left off, and rethinking the issue of the incentives that you're giving to these big mining corporations vis-a-vis the investments that you're making to the ASM sector. And I say that because I see they are the majority represented in the room today, so they can either agree with what I'm saying or otherwise, but I think we need to rethink and sort of strike a balance and ask ourselves hard questions. For instance, when you give a tax incentive to a company, it's because there is something that you want to get in return. You either want to promote investment, or you want to create jobs for the communities in those areas. So my question would be, and I don't have the answers, you have the answers as we are sitting here, is have you been able to achieve that? Because when you give us a tax incentive, it also means that the government is foregoing some revenues that they would have collected, right? So as we have given those incentives to these big mining corporations against what we are making as investment to the ASM sector, are we getting the benefits that we would have achieved, or do we now need to focus our attention to the ASM sector? And for me, I think we need to make investment to the ASM sector. And I think we have also alluded to some of the challenges that they have faced. You are seen to be operating illegally, and we have seen the government in the past say they have partially lifted the moratorium on mining. So we expect that we will now be able to get the licenses and all that. But further from that is what also can the government do? And I know from the conversations that we have had, one is access to formal markets. Because one of the things that we'll appreciate, a lot of the small-scale mining done in Kenya, 70 to 80% of it is informal. So what that means is we have a lot of middlemen who take advantage of the ASMs. So if the government can be able to invest and have a formal market, and we have seen them trying to do that with the Gemstone Center in Voi, but are we seeing the same done across other counties where mining is happening, so that we ensure that we are cutting off the middleman, so we are first ensuring that the miner is getting the full benefit of the minerals, but we're also ensuring that the government is not losing revenues to smuggling of those resources. Then, and I think now this is directly to the ASM. We also need to learn to the artisanal and small-scale miners. Yes, Hannah is telling me my time is almost up. Swahili ni Muhammad atatranslate at the end of it. Lakini tunasema pia sisi wale ambao tunafanya ule uchimbaji wa madini, zile processes zenye tunafuata zikuwe best practices. For instance, tusikuwe na a lot of environmental degradation, so that the government now has to come, watenge pesa ili rehabilitate hizo mining sites. Can we learn to also practice safe mining? And lastly, what else the government can do. I think it's closely related to that. Ni pia watupatie yale mafunzo. Si pia sisi tunataka tujue venye tunaweza fanya hizo mining bila ajali kwa zile mining sites, ama tufanye pia bila a lot of impact on the environment. And also, and I think this is a conversation that has been going on, with the formalization of the sector, we can now have access to credit. The government can lend to cooperatives and we are able to acquire zile equipment. Najua tulienda pale Turkana wakasema equipment unapewa mara moja na haupati tena, kwa sababu kuna watu wengi wanategemea hizo equipment. Lakini tukikuwa kwa vile vikundi tunaweza pata zile pesa na tupate hizo equipment zenye tunaweza tumia to increase production. That's my submission.
Asante sana. We'll summarize Kiswahili towards the end. But Professor, from a tax perspective, we keep on talking about the potential. So what strategies do we need to adopt as a country to ensure that not only the big multinational corporations benefit, but also the small scale artisanal miners? Because for us to mobilize DRM from the extractive sectors, we also need to update or make our tax regimes friendly to all the extractive sector players. So what do we need to do as a country?
Wacha nijaribu kusimama. Kwanza, please greet your neighbor and say, inaonekana huyu jamaa haelewi Kiswahili vizuri. Tell. Mwambie jirani, it appears this guy doesn't know. Ni kama huyu mtu haelewi Kiswahili vizuri, sema hivyo. Tutamsaidia aje? Dada, ni kama sielewi, najaribu. Because I've seen, unajua hii ugonjwa inaitwa chicken syndrome, where watu wanaanza chicken syndrome, catching up. Hii side, if you are asleep, please may I see your hand? Unajijua? Now, again, allow me to nijaribu Kiswahili kidogo na pia Kiingereza, kwa sababu wakati wetu nilikwambia hapo awali hatukufunzwa Kiswahili, ni kujifunza. But there is one thing I want us to agree, that government is looking for resources from wrong sources while leaving their own domestic resources here. Wanaenda ng'ambo, kule ng'ambo kutafuta pesa, wakiwacha fedha nyumbani. Sasa, that is the problem that we have. We need to tap the potential that is here. And how do we do it? What is Botswana doing? Botswana is telling their guys, are they called Dibuas or Dibias, that you have been here for a century, selling, extracting and selling minerals. If this thing you are doing here is not beneficial to you, then why are you doing it? Please give us 50% shareholding in your company. And why is that important? Why are we saying, and Rwanda is doing the same, and many other countries around the world? Because look, these countries where our multinational enterprises come from don't have minerals. And yet, their contribution in terms of mineral revenue to the global contribution is 100 times or 1,000 times higher than ours. Wanatoa zile mineral wanauza wapi? They are getting it from Africa. So why are they creating wealth from our resources, yet we are becoming poorer and poorer? Why should DRC, which contributes more than 30% of what goes on in the Silicon Valley, be considered one of the poorest countries on earth. This is what I want government to do. One, insist on shareholding. Why? Because once you're a shareholder, you get to understand the business model that is being used, and that will enable you to know exactly how much has been produced and their value. That is point number one. Number two, align the legislations so that we don't have some pieces of legislation lying in Ministry of Mining, others in Environment, others in KRA. And yet they are different. KRA has the capacity on tax matters. Why should Minister of Mining be deciding on tax and then KRA to collect? Give KRA the authority to determine all matters that are related to taxes, even if royalties are being paid to Minister of Mining for purposes of holding the blocks. The second point, which I don't know if the second or the third, globally, countries have created what is called sovereign wealth fund, where all the royalties and the taxes go. And then government and all the stakeholders work out how to share from a common pool. As it is now, we don't know which goes where and which goes where. We need to consolidate it first. Tuweke hii keki yetu pamoja, ndio tujue tutaigawa namna gani. Kama hatujui ni kiasi gani ya keki, tutaigawa aje? Let's understand first the size of this cake, then we decide how to distribute it. And the only way to understand it is to put it in a sovereign fund. Now, we also need, I don't know how to call transfer pricing in... let me call it transfer pricing, utatafsiri. Now we have our transfer pricing rules. By this I mean when related parties are involved in transactions. Wale wako hapa na wenzao ambao wako nje ya nchi, right? When they get involved in transactions, always the intention is to benefit them, not us. Tuweke sheria, tulainishe sheria ili tuweze ya kwanza kuelewa ni nini wanafanya, ya pili kuwalazimisha kulipa kodi kwa njia inayofaa. We do this by understanding the commodity prices. If we go, for example, if it is gold, we know the London exchange for gold, if whatever diamond and all those. So we get arm's length price and get the necessary documentation so that we are sure we are getting the right value, right? And we need capacity building in transfer pricing activities for both the people of the Ministry of Mining as well as those in KRA and everyone who is involved, so that we understand the process. And finally, information exchange. Tunajua ya kwamba kuna shughuli za madini zinaendelea Tanzania na pia Rwanda na pia Kenya. Mbona hatuwezi elewana ili tujue huyu amefanya nini Tanzania na amefanya nini Kenya na amefanya nini Rwanda? Akiwa Rwanda kuna sheria tofauti, Tanzania kuna sheria tofauti, Kenya kuna sheria tofauti. Wanaweza kufanya nini? Well, they can confuse us using the various legislations. Thank you very much.
Asante sana. We have come to the end of this panel discussion. So before niruhusu panelists wangu washuke, nitajaribu kusummarize. Si kazi ya translation nilikuwa nimeachiwa mimi. Let me see how good my mind was in capturing the points. But tumeweza kuambiwa ya kwamba kama nchi uwezo uko wa kuhakikisha kuwa domestic resource mobilization itaweza kutuendeleza as a country. Lakini kabla hatujafanya hivyo, tunafaa tuweze kujua kwanza hii madini imetolewa nchi yetu ya Kenya kiwango, ama ukiangalia ni kiasi gani ama kiwango gani. And we do that by ensuring that one of the things that the professor ametuambia ni kukuwa na kitu inaitwa sovereign wealth fund. The same way tu tunakuwa na the consolidated fund where pesa zote zile zinakuja from tax and debt zinaingia the Central Bank of Kenya before tuanze kudistribute. Tuweze kukuwa na sovereign fund ya kuhakikisha kwa tunaweza kujua kwanza tumepata fedha kiwango gani kutoka kwa uuzaji wa madini before tuanze kugawana. La pili, tumeweza kuambiwa pia serikali sahi tukiitisha wawekezaji wakuje they invest in the mining sector, we insist on shareholding. Shareholding ni Kiswahili? Shareholder ni kina nani? Washikadau. No, stakeholder is washikadau. Hisa. At least 50% ownership. Sahi tunapata royalty at the rate of 5%. The royalty is at 5%. Watu wa mining sector, royalty sahi ni 5%. 10%. Na tumesema hiyo 10% ni kidogo. So tukileta wawekezaji wapya, when we are negotiating the contracts, inamaanisha kama serikali tunafaa to insist on shareholding ya juu zaidi ndio tuweze kubenefit, kwa sababu what is declared out of our country is low quality bulk raw materials. Mawe zikitoka unasikia tu hii ni mawe iko na dhahabu. We need to ensure that we streamline the legislation, sheria. Na tukitengeneza hizi sheria tusisahau watu we don't forget the artisanal miners, because at the end of the day profits from the multinational corporations zinaenda wapi? Zinaenda kwao kutengeneza nchi zao. Lakini tukiinvest kwa the small scale na the artisanal miners, profit inabaki wapi? Na hivyo ndio tutaweza kuendelea kama nchi. Asanteni sana my panelists, please makofi kwao mpaka waweze kukaa. Or I held them here for the Q&A. Okay, tafadhalini, nimesikia. I thought we were crossing over to Kwame, but tafadhalini. He's not there. Yes, tafadhali, sorry. Yes, I'm told that we are still having internet challenges, so it's the issues with connectivity. We'll open it up to the floor tuweze kuuliza maswali generally, not just directed at the panelists, but sometimes pia there are comments that tunaweza kufikiria baada tukimaliza hili jukwaa la madini, tuweze kujua ni wapi tunafaa kuenda kama nchi for us to enjoy the benefits from the extractive sector. But before tuanze maswali, ningeomba dakika moja kama tunaweza kusimama tafadhali. A minute. I'll require everyone asimame dakika moja tu to stretch. Tafadhali sukuma kiti yako mbele, push your seat forward and stand behind it so that you don't fall. Haya, we are doing a small activity, less than a minute and a half tops. Sawa. Very simple instructions. My instructions are: 1, you say what I say and you do what I tell you to do. Sawa. Useme venye nitasema na ufanye venye nikikwambia jump forward ama uruke mbele, tafadhali kama uwezi ruka, you just step. Sawa. Tuko tayari? Instruction number 1, say what I say and you do what I say. Sawa. Sema venye nimetasema na ufanye venye nimekwambia ufanye. Haya, jump forward. Jump backwards. Hamsemi. I want people to say. Say it and do it. Jump forward. Jump backwards. Jump left. Jump right. Naona kuna watu wako na shida left na right. Kila mtu aweke left yake juu. Right. Very good people. Sasa now, this next bit is very important. Say what I say, but you do the opposite. Nikikwambia jump forward, utasema jump forward lakini una jump. Sawa? Instruction iko sawa? Tujaribu tena. Say what I say, you do the opposite. Sawa? Jump left. Watu okay. Instruction, narudia instruction. Haya, mnisikize, nitarudia instructions. Say what I say, sema venye nasema, and you do the opposite. Very simple instructions. Jump back. Jump left. Naona watu wako sawa. Now, one more. Final. Now, you say the opposite. Say, but you do what I say. Nikisema jump backwards, utasema, but what do you do? So whatever you are saying is the opposite, lakini unafanya the action. So, this is the hardest one. That's why tuliweka ikuwe mwisho. Say the opposite, but you do the right thing. Let's try. Jump forward. We can sit. In the interest of time. Asanteni sana. Now the chicken syndrome naona ni kama itaisha for the next 30 minutes. We are opening it up to the members. Tafadhali, kama uko na swali, kama uko na comment, hands up. Then the microphone will find. There is a question pale nyuma in that table, and then we come here, and then we come here. Sawa. Tunaanza kule nyuma. Extreme. Yes.
Asante sana. Nitaongea Kiswahili. Jina langu ni Thomas Ekai Eramram. Mimi ni mwenyekiti wa Turkana Extractive Consortium. Nimetoka Turkana South, ambaye Lokichar Basin imekalia, ambaye mafuta ilibebwa mwaka 2016 na rais wa 4 wa Kenya. Lakini jambo ambalo nimefurahi sana kwa conference, imetufungua macho walimu wetu. Sasa utusaidie ile njia tutapata benefit yetu. Mafuta ilienda, na tumesikia pale ikichimbwa ushuru yote inachukuliwa na serikali kusaidia the host community. Na nikasikia walimu huko na daktari wetu kutoka upande wangu huko Mlailo wakisema ya kwamba community 11, madam ndio alisema hivyo, wali benefit. Na wengine wakasema sisi tukastuka. Sisi mafuta yetu ilienda 5% ile tuliahidiwa na rais wa 4 wa nchi ya Kenya, hatukupata, na mafuta iliuzwa. Na msemo wetu wa Turkana, mababu zangu, by the way, mimi nimeenda, niko na 60 plus. Kwa hivyo usione kama sijui mambo ya mababu, ninajua. Walisema ukipatia mtu kitu, ukikuja kwetu, vile Kenya Oil and Gas ako na hiyo experience chini ya uongozi mzuri, tukichinjia mbuzi atakula kila kitu, lakini miguu moja ya right inarudishwa kwa mwenye alikukaribisha. Sasa msemo hiyo imetusumbua sisi generation after generation. Ninaomba mtupatie ile njia tutafuatana na yule rais wa 4 ama yule watano, tujue haki yetu, ile 5% iko wapi, tuletewe. Kwa sababu kama communities wale wengine ambaye madini ilipatikana kwao, policy ile, kwa nini tusiletewe hata si tu benefit kwa ile yetu? Ya pili, tunaomba kulingana na sheria yenu ya Kenya, maana huko sisi tunasema tunaenda Kenya, hata leo tuko Kenya. Sheria article 35 inaeleza jinsi mwananchi anaweza kupata information. Sisi hatuna information hata ya mafuta yetu iliuzwa ngapi. Tunasikia tu rumors, mamilioni iliuzwa China, iliuzwa. Ukienda kwa wale wanahusika, unanyuma unaambia hiyo ni siri ya serikali. Na hii article ina benefit watu wengine, na sisi watu wana we don't benefit. Utuelezee na utufungulie macho na mtupatie policy ya kufuata kuanzia leo, maana niko na Waturkana hapa zaidi ya 20, twende tudai ile 5% yetu, kwa sababu ni lazima turudishwe shukrani. Hata kama ingawa kulikuwa kuna threatening words kutoka kwa regime hiyo ya fourth president, alisema ukifuata mafuta utarudi ukiwa juu ya ndani ya jeneza. Alisema ukisimamisha mafuta utarudishwa ukiwa ndani ya jeneza. Na alisema lecture ilikuwa mwezi wa 6 2016, tukashindwa. Hata kama kitu iko ndani ya mchanga na inakaa juu ya mchanga, si mimi, sheria inasema ni si nimekaa hapo zaidi ya 6 months, hapo ni kwangu, na wewe umepata ndani, sikuja tukubaliane, unipatie ile tunakubaliana. Sasa ukinichukulia alafu baadaye unaniambia ukifuata sana utaletwa ukiwa ndani ya sanduku. Mtusaidie kama hii conference tafadhali. Asante sana daktari na wale wengine.
Ningeomba tuweze kukua brief pia kwa maswali ndio tuweze kupeana namba ni pale. There's a lady, that hand there. And then we come to this table. There's this gentleman in grey. Tutaanza kujibu hizo 4 and then we take a second round. Sawa? Tafadhali.
Yes. Thank you. My name is Gordon Kachola Odhiambo from Afrodad. Prof. Madini sio wingi wa neno dini eh? I hope sasa unajua. May I begin as follows? I think from his talk you realize there's lack of information right at the grassroots. So how do we take the conversation to the grassroots? A challenge to all of us. People must be informed, because if they are informed, they are empowered and they shall stand for their rights. So let us do what we must to ensure people are informed. That's when they will stand against injustices, when their rights are abused. 2, on matters royalty. Kenya, I'm not sure, it's 5 or 10%. 10%. And you know, it's sad, and Prof, you and the rest of us here will agree that these royalties, sometimes we don't determine them. OECD sometimes determine these things. So when we don't determine the royalties, then how then do we have a say over our own minerals? One thing that we must do moving forward is have a voice over our minerals, not let other people determine what we are going to charge. And when we are letting go our minerals, why must OECD determine to us that we let them go when there is no value addition on it? Wewe umeuza, kwa mfano nitatumia hii bagi hapa. Hii bagi, this is mineral extracted from Kwale, for example. It is 35 kgs. And you know, this is raw material. Hii ni mawe. Inside this there is almost 17 or 20 kgs of gold, let's say for example, or diamond. So imagine wewe utachukua 10% ya 35 kg of a rock, not of gold or diamond. We must begin to value add and insist that upon value addition, that is when we charge royalty. Finally, we can't speak about what we are speaking about here and we are ignoring the illicit financial flows. Prof, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to believe that tax evasion is under transfer pricing thereabout, and it is tax evasion, I want to believe, having been in Kerry for some time, that tax evasion is one of the ways that illicit financial flows is conducted in this country. Transfer pricing is highly secretive, highly secretive. It is not public. If you go to even the taxman, there's a department called Exchange of Information Office. You will never know what they do there. You will never know. It is something very secretive. And I was very disappointed while I was sitting here when she did mention that this particular bit in the afternoon will not be discussed. That is, coming there. Imagine, how are we going to talk about this extractive industry and we are not talking about illicit financial flows? Yani ni kama tunazungumza kitu yenye haiko, because that is where we lose it. We've just been told that according to IMF, there is this amount of money that we are losing. According to UN, WTO, it's in billions of dollars. Kenya today has the potential of contributing up to 10% of the country's GDP. The extractive industry has the potential of contributing up to 10% to our GDP. What are we contributing now in the extractive industry? Less than 1%. Honestly, are we moving anywhere? Illicit financial flows. Please bring it back to the discussion. Thank you.
Na kwa majina yangu naitwa Triana Mwandangu, natokea maeneo ya Taita Taveta na natoka mahali kuna chimbo chuma ile ANO. Mimi shukrani zangu nilikuwa nataka kushukuru mashirika kama Taita Taveta Human Rights Watch imetuinua sasa sisi artisanal miners. Tulikuwa hatujui rasilimali zenye zilikuwa kwetu, lakini wametufanya tukajua kwamba tunakalia uchumi. Pili, kuna mashirika kama Awake, kuna Oxfam, na naona hapa pia wametuinua sana kupitia masomo ya madini. Na nataka niseme ya kwamba serikali pia naishukuru kwa sababu imetutambua sisi artisanal miners, na ni mwelekeo mzuri kwa sababu sisi ndio tuko pale mashinani na sisi ndio tunajua mali kuna madini. Sisi tukikaa hivi mtu anaweza tuona hivi na wanatudharau, lakini sisi tunajua madini mali yako na ni migodi mikubwa, na kulingana na vile artisanal miners wamekiwa sheria ngumu, labda utakani kutumia mashini, tunatumia mikono, tunachoka, na inabidi sasa tunyamaze kwa sababu nikisema itachimbwa na mashini na mimi sina mashini, nitaendelea kubaki maskini, na pia jamii yangu inaendelea kubaki maskini, pia vikundi vinaendelea kubaki maskini. Kwa hivyo tunaomba serikali yetu ituondolee yale masharti magumu, hata kama ni mashini moja ama mashini mbili tutumie, ili na sisi tuone faida ya madini, na sio sisi vikundi ama jamii. Madini ni ya Kenya. Na nikiangalia kama kule kwetu yale madini yako pale yanaweza kulea hata Kenya nzima, kwa sababu ni madini. Tumefanya prospecting na ile tulifanya ni kwamba tuliona kwamba sheria zimekuwa ngumu, tulifunika kabisa isionekane mpaka ile siku labda tutaruhusiwa na sisi tu benefit, kwa sababu ukiangalia serikali yetu kuna mahali wanashindwa kuangalia vizuri. Kuna watu wanaitwa brokers. Unapata broker amekuja pale anajifanya ni investor, anakuja pale anataka kufanya kazi, kumbe hata si investor, yeye anataka kupora na aende. Tena hana license, hana chochote. Na sisi tunaendelea kubaki maskini. Ombi langu kwa serikali, kazi tufanye na kikundi, jamii, investor na serikali. Hiyo tutaona faida kwa jamii na pia faida kwa vikundi. Maana tukiangalia sasa hivi ile rasilimali iko pale. Mtu kama mimi hata nikiaga leo bado labda mtu mwingine Mungu amuinue na aje ajue kwamba pale kuna madini. Maana tumeogopa kusema. Maana ukiangalia hata mwingine uko naye, ukishamwambia hapa iko, atakuruka kesho na alete broker na madini aende. Na uendelee kubaki masikini. Na tena jambo lingine tuangalie kwa serikali. Ukiangalia kama jamii mali mimi ninatoka, kuna watoto wametoka form 4 wamepita na B, wamepita na C, na madini yako pale, na ukiangalia napita kila siku yanaenda, na ukiangalia utapata yule mtu hana license, na tuliambiwa kwamba license zilifungiwa. Je, hawa wanatoa wapi? Na wakati sisi tunaambiwa hakuna license. Tukiangalia pale kwetu tuko na James Center ambayo imefunguliwa. Na tunaomba kwamba serikali kuna investors wako ambao wanatafuta madini na wajui mali watapata. Wache kwa Samuel Miners, tuko hapo, tutajua vile kasitafanya.
We answer and then, yes, please, you and then we start answering.
Okay, thank you, sir. I'm Equal Sylvester. I'm from Turkana, and I'm representing ASMAC, Artisanal and Small Scale Miners of Kenya. I have a question, especially on SDM, Artisanal and Small Scale Miners of Gold Mine. So, my question is, the government treat artisanal miners as illegal, and us, I'm speaking on the point of Turkana, and we treat this as an alternative means for us to live. If the government treats us that way, that means the livelihood of some people, they will continue living in poverty. For us, you know, we live in pastures, we depend on animals. So this is an alternative. So we ask the government why the government is treating ASMs as illegal, and yet that the policy is being developed. Then the second is about we have the gemstone center being developed for the gemstones. Now I'm speaking on a point of gold. We would like also the government also to think towards giving us additional value addition, especially on gold, because we are losing a lot of life for the people who seek the market. Thank you.
Asante. Before we answer, I'm told issues are ASM. Kesho. Any issues are ASM. Tomorrow we are not discussing anything. Kesho ni ASM and what we need to do for ASM. But for today, the next set of questions that we will pick zikuwe on taxation na revenue mobilization. And for that, I'll invite Prof. Aongelele one or two things, especially on issues around, I can also contribute, but on the host community and how they benefit. And there are the issues on should we be taxing, or like should our royalties be calculated on the raw materials that are exported or the actual value addition?
Okay. Tena umwambie naona huyu jamaa elewe vizuri lakini atajaribu. Sawa? Now, and I see my friend from the land of Osajefo is looking at me. Osajefo is coming Kuruma. We had a similar discussion not too long ago at Mensvik Hotel in East Legon, and I saw someone who looks like you. Now, mandugu zangu na madada zangu kutoka Turkana, na ninaona mmekula ekreng kabisa. Ekreng. Wapi apese? Apese? Apese iko. Now, kila mtu ako na haki ya what do you call benefit, kufaidika kulingana na maadili ambazo zinatokana kwao. Nimejaribu hapo? Nimejaribu? Niongeze na Kiswahili kidogo na Kiingereza? Now, wacha niongee Kiingereza kidogo alafu nitatafsiri. This is the notion of communities as juridical persons. But communities have rights. that they protect on behalf of individual members, which rights are preserved, transmitted, and distributed to all the members of that community. Ikiwa kuna kitu ambacho unaona haijaendelea vizuri, take the government to court. Uko na haki ya kupeleka serikali mahakamani. That is your right, because you are fighting over your rights, and your rights are well enshrined in the distribution formula, the benefit sharing formula that we are using currently, which is 7-2-1. 70% central government, 20% county government, 10% community. Shida iliyoko ni ya kwamba hatujui ni pesa ngapi, how much exactly was the value of the oil that you are talking about. And you have a right to know. Go for constitutional interpretation. Demand to be told how much it was worth, and based on the profit sharing formula, get money that belongs to the community. It is not a privilege, it is a right, protected by the Constitution, protected by legislation, which is very well documented. Now, my friend here, he kept referring to me. Recently we had a long discussion with him at Mfangano Islands for a whole week. And illicit financial flows. The multinational corporations or multinational enterprises that are involved in the extractive sector in our land have designed very complex schemes for ensuring that we do not get what we deserve. For example, tax law allows them something called investment allowance, which is 100% of whatever they have invested in the country, in that sector. The question is, how do we know the value? For example, if they bring in machinery and they tell us this machinery is worth 10 billion shillings, how do we know? This is why we are saying we need capacity building in this sector. When they take a loan from their corporate head office and they charge that loan at 30%, they are telling you, we are getting that loan from corporate head office because Kenya doesn't have enough money to underwrite this process, so we shall get money from our corporate head office. The interest that is paid on that loan is tax deductible. In other words, hiyo interest inatumika kupunguza kodi. The other thing that we have to agree is what we call inter-party or related party transactions. For example, saa ile wanauza, watakwambia wanauzia wenzao nje. Ikiwa ni thamani, the value is say 10 billion, watatuambia ni 1 billion, ili ile share yetu iwe chini. Inter-party or related party transaction, right? Alafu, the Ministry of Mining, and this is important, does auditing of the costs of production, and especially those that are tax related. they don't have capacity to do tax audits. Why is that happening when it is obvious? Why do you take volleyballers to do football? There is a government agency called KRA that has capacity to do tax audit. Why don't you allow it to do its tax audit? Because it is very easy. The tax is a very complex thing. And these multinational corporations are involved in something called triangulation, where sometimes they sell their rights in the stock exchange in London, and you don't know here. How would you know? That requires someone with capacity to do. Tafadhalini, if there are people from Ministry of Mining, go and tell the bosses that tax matters should go to tax and only relevant things should remain in mining. That will infuse efficiency in that system. Because after all, that money is going to the same government. What is the competition about? Mbona tunapigania pesa, hela ambazo zote ni za serikali, ikiwa ni idara ya madini ama ya hela au fedha, si bado ni idara na maidara za serikali? Mbona wapiganie pesa ambazo zote ni za serikali? Hiyo ndio inaleta hii shida, kwa sababu sasa wenzangu wa Turkana watapelekwa mining, wapelekwe parliament, wapelekwe treasury, hawajui waende wapi. Enda kotini.
Asante Bwana Salat. Wakati ambapo zile ridhaa revenue ambazo zinatokana na extractives, make sure that you get the best value as a community. La pili, Prof amezungumzia kwenda kotini. Nilikuwa nataka kuzungumzia ile ambayo tunaita public interest litigation. Ni njia bora zaidi kuchukua zile hatua ambazo zitaweza zikawanufaidi katika jamii. Pili, kuna ile ambayo tunaita petition. Prof pia alikuwa amezungumzia hiyo. But illicit financial flows, utoroshaji wa fedha haramu, lazima iwe imevuka mipaka. Haiwezi ikaitwa illicit financial flows wakati ambapo itakuwa inazungukia nchini. Hiyo lazima ivuke mipaka. Na katika ile illicit financial flows ambazo watokana zaidi na extractives, utapata zile vitendo vya uhalifu ambayo tunaita criminal activities ni 65%. Kuna zile commercial activities, shughuli za kibiashara kama tax evasion na tax avoidance, hiyo ni 30%. 5% inatokana na ufisadi. Lakini lijulikane kuwa hiyo 5% ndio inachangia ile 65% na ile 30%. Hivi mashirika na community lazima wadai zile ambazo tunaita mikataba, public contract, zile ambazo tunaita mikataba contracts, ili ijulikane kuwa yule mwekezaji ambaye anakuja kuwekeza na kufanya ile uziduaji, lazima community ijue ni contract imepewa ya miaka ngapi. La pili, msaidiwa na wale MCAs na wabunge ili waweze wakafanya ile inaitwa cost benefit analysis, ya kwamba vile wanarejea na vile watakao toka na yale mapato ambayo yatatokea iwe ni ya manufaa mingi kuliko ile mining ambayo inafanyika katika community. Number 2, kuna ile ambayo tunaita beneficial ownership. Ni nani miliki wa hii kampuni? Manake huwa tunapewa kurugenzi, wale ambao tunaita directors, but in real sense the beneficial owners, wale ambao wananufaika zaidi na hizi makampuni ni kina nani? Manake utapata ni wanasiasa wale ambao wanawatetea, but kufika kule wao ndio wanamiliki haya makampuni. Mtapata haki kweli? Haija kuwepo, sivyo? Wanasema mbuzi, nani akiwa hakimu, mbuzi ana haki. Ya pili, bunge linafaa kutekeleza ile ambayo tunaita oversight. Jambo ambalo ningependa kuwasihi wale wabunge wenu, waambie watekeleze jukumu lao la oversight. Zile kodi ambazo zinatupatikana na haya makampuni ili yaweze kurejea kwenye community.
Asante sana. Nafikiri sasa imefika wakati wa lunch, but generally there is an opportunity, especially kwa the legal framework, to address the issues that have been said here. As we open up, kulikuwa na national geo survey that wakati tuliweka moratorium, tuliambiwa moratorium ya kuzuia uchimbaji ama kutoa license mpya ni ya nini? Ya kuhakikisha tumechukua stock ya mineral resources zetu. And the government ilikuwa inafaa ifanye survey, si ndio? If the survey is complete, do we even know what was found? One. Number two, hakuna feedback. Now from the rapporteurs, those are some of the things that tungependa the Ministry of Mining iweze kuaddress. Number two, transparency. Semeni transparency. Madini, whatever that was sold na whatever serikali imepata, tunafaa tuweze kujua, ndio kesho 10% yetu hatutaweza kujua 10% ya kwenda kwa community ni ngapi kama hatujui. Ukienda kwa wizara ya mining, go to their website today. Is there any information on the value, the royalties and all that? Inapatikana. There is we can improve. The other thing, and finally, nikimaliza before I hand over to the program coordinator, we can still use parliament for the case of Turkana, our members of parliament. Number one, there is that access to information. Or siku hizi tumeona mawaziri wanaenda wapi? Bunge. Tutumie bunge wetu, tuulize swali. Je, ile oil iliuzwa ilikuwa ya pesa ngapi? Na ile 5% ilikuwa inafaa iende kwa community ni ngapi, na wanafaa kupewa lini? That is a question that the parliament can summon both waziri wa fedha na waziri wa mambo ya mining. So let's use all the available opportunities. I would like to release my panelists and hand back the program to the program coordinator. Asanteni sana, naomba muwapigie makofi.
Hiyo panel inataka makofi ingine tafadhali. Asante. Yes sir. Professor Miriam Edwin Mohamed, asante sana. Tumeongea kuhusu sekta hii yetu ya uzinduaji, sekta ya madini na vile inaweza kuongeza vyanzo vya mapato ya undani, deni la umma. Lakini nataka kufanya assessment kidogo tu, nisikia ama tulikuwa tunasikiza. Tumeambiwa deni letu la umma liko trilioni ngapi? Ati? Mohamed, mtarudi hapa. Deni letu la umma limefika trilioni ngapi? 10.5 trillion. Haya, swali la pili. Riba ambayo tunalipa kwa hiyo deni imefika trilioni ngapi? Mohamed, hebu simama utupatie figa. Naona kuna mzee pale atapewa zawadi. 635 million. Billion. 635 billion. Haya. royalties ambazo zililipwa according to Auditor General report ilikuwa ni bilioni ngapi? Aya, wachani niwaambie kwa nini ninauliza haya maswali. My people perish because, turudie tena, my people perish. Wakati ningependa kuongea na wachimbaji wetu wadogo ambao wako hapa. Wakati tunaamka kuongea kuhusu mambo ambayo au changamoto zetu, huwa tunaongea changamoto from very emotional, sio? Watoto wetu, shule. Sitiriana aliamuka akasema, but wakati unaamka kuongea, especially before mtu ambaye anatengeneza sera au policy maker, mambo ya kukua na facts and figures zako ni muhimu sana. Kweli ama uongo? Na ndio maana huwa tuna convene dialogues kama hizi ndio tuwaelimishe, na wengi ambao mmeitwa hapa ni leaders wa vikundi vyenu, sio? Kwa sababu hatuwezi kuwa tunaenda grassroots kila all the time, sio? So inakuwa ni ati nyinyi mnaajibika, mafunzo ambayo mnapata hapa mnapeleka pale grassroots, kweli? Si ndio? Kwa hivyo make sure uko na the right facts and figures. Professor, sijui utakuja na sisi, uketi na sisi siku 2-3 tuelimishe. Hata mimi nimeelimika. Mambo kuhusu na taxation ama kutoa ushuru na makampuni yale makubwa ambayo yanalipa ushuru ni jambo lazima sisi tuelewe kama Wakenya. Si wachimbaji wadogo peke yake, sisi kama Wakenya. In fact, swali langu ni wakati tuna negotiate contract, nani anakuanga ameketi kwa meza kurepresent Mkenya? Sina jibu. Samani? Lakini ilikuwa ni, najua kulikuwa na maswali mengi, tunaweza kuweka after lunch, tunaweza kuanza na hayo maswali. Nitachukua maswali 3 tu after lunch. Jambo la kwa nini tulitoa session ya curbing illicit financial flows, panelists ambao tulikuwa tumeita kudiscuss the matter hawakupatikana. Tutaongea na committee tuone the way we can put it as a discussion. I'm not promising anything, but we'll consider. Kesho tutaongea kuhusu wachimbaji wadogo in full. Kesho ni siku yenu, sawa sawa? Haya. Baada ya hii tutaenda kupigwa picha pale nje. Alafu after picha nitawaelekeza mahali utachukua meal card. Tunavuka kwa sababu hii hoteli iko mara 2, tutavuka upande ile tunaenda Johari restaurant. Na ninaomba saa hii probably enda lunch 1:30, turudi hapa 2:30 on the dot. Tafadhali. Sawa sawa? Asanti. Mkuwe na lunch njema. And for our Ghanaian brother, it is lunch time. We're going for a photo shoot outside and milk cards will be given to us.